She ruled with beauty,
Your
charm,
Majesty,
and a cruelty
we
so
implore you
terrifying
to
that even her
reconsider
own
the
people
treaties.
whispered her name
Your
like a
presence
curse.
threatens
This
our
is the
sovereignty.
forgotten queen who turned Madagascar into a kingdom
Her
of fear.
enemies were not just defeated.
In the early 19th
They were
century, far from the
systematically
eyes of Europe's
eliminated.
powerful empires,
Entire
the island of Madagascar was ruled
the
by a
very
queen whose
beginning,
legacy
her
would
rule
become one of
sent
the
a
most
clear
chilling in
message.
history.
Loyalty
Ranavalona I,
would be
often
rewarded,
remembered as their
but
mad
betrayal.
queen. Her story is not just one of power, but of absolute control, paranoia, and survival in a rapidly changing world. Born into modest beginnings, Ranavalona rose to the throne through a mixture of political strategy and ruthless determination. When her husband, King Ranavalona I, died in 1828, the rightful heir was expected to continue his pro-European policies. But Ranavalona had other plans. Backed by powerful military leaders, she seized control, eliminating rivals without hesitation. From the very beginning, her rule sent a clear message: loyalty would be rewarded, but betrayal, even suspected betrayal, would be met with death. She inherited a kingdom that had begun embracing Western ideas, Christianity, and trade. Yet Ranavalona saw these foreign influences not as progress, but as threats to her authority and to Malagasy traditions. What followed was a reign that would isolate Madagascar from much of the outside world and plunge it into a period of intense fear and bloodshed. Her story is not simply about cruelty, but about a ruler determined to protect her sovereignty at any cost, even if that cost was the lives of thousands. Ranavalona I's rise to power was anything but ordinary, and it set the tone for the brutality that would define her reign. After the death of King Ranavalona I, the natural successor should have been his nephew. However, Ranavalona, with the support of influential nobles and military commanders, orchestrated a swift and decisive takeover. Her enemies were not just defeated, they were systematically eliminated. Entire families connected to rival claims were executed, ensuring no future threats to her throne. This initial purge was only the beginning. Once crowned, Ranavalona wasted no time consolidating power. She understood that ruling Madagascar required more than just a crown. It required fear, obedience, and absolute authority. Her court became a place where suspicion thrived. Anyone could be accused of disloyalty, and accusations alone were often enough to seal a person's fate. Despite this, Ranavalona portrayed herself as a protector of Malagasy identity. She rejected the growing influence of European missionaries and traders, believing they would erode her culture and weaken her rule. To her supporters, she was a defender of tradition. To her critics, she was a tyrant who ruled through terror. But in her mind, these harsh measures were necessary. She believed that without strict control, her kingdom would fall into foreign hands. And so, she began reshaping Madagascar into a nation cut off from outside influence, a decision that would have devastating consequences for her people. One of the most infamous aspects of Ranavalona I's rule was her use of a brutal system of justice known as the tangena ordeal. This practice was not just punishment, it was a deadly test of innocence. Accused individuals were forced to consume poison made from the tangena nut, along with pieces of chicken skin. If they vomited up all 3 pieces of skin, they were declared innocent. If not, they were considered guilty, and often died from the poison anyway. The system was deeply flawed, yet it became a central tool of her. Thousands of people were subjected to this ordeal, often based on little more than suspicion or false accusations. Entire communities lived in constant fear, knowing that a single accusation could lead to a deadly trial. The tangena ordeal served a dual purpose: it reinforced Ranavalona's authority while also eliminating potential threats. Critics argue that it was less about justice and more about control. The sheer number of deaths attributed to this practice is staggering, with some estimates suggesting that tens of thousands perished during her reign due to tangena alone. Despite the horror it caused, Ranavalona saw it as a legitimate way to maintain order and divine judgment. In her view, the spirits would reveal the truth. But for her people, it became a symbol of a reign defined by fear, suffering, and the constant shadow of. Ranavalona's hostility toward foreign influence reached its peak in her treatment of Christian missionaries and converts. When she came to power, Christianity had begun spreading across Madagascar, largely due to the efforts of British missionaries. Schools were being established, and literacy was increasing. But Ranavalona saw this as a direct threat. Christianity encouraged loyalty to a higher spiritual authority, which conflicted with her demand for absolute obedience. In response, she banned Christian practices and expelled many missionaries from the island. Malagasy converts were given a choice: renounce their faith or face severe punishment. Many refused, and paid the ultimate price. Public executions became a tool of intimidation. Converts were tortured, imprisoned, or killed in brutal ways meant to discourage others from following the same path. Despite this, Christianity did not disappear. Instead, it went underground. Secret gatherings and hidden prayers became acts of quiet resistance. Ranavalonar's crackdown highlighted her deep fear of losing control. She believed that allowing foreign religions would open the door to foreign domination. Ironically, her extreme measures only strengthened the resolve of many believers. Today, her persecution of Christians is remembered as one of the darkest chapters of her rule. It reveals a ruler who was not only determined to maintain power but also willing to suppress any idea that challenged her authority, no matter how peaceful it may have been. Beyond religion and justice, Ranavalona I enforced strict labor policies that pushed her people to their limits. One of the most devastating systems she implemented was forced labor, known as Fanampona. Under this system, citizens were required to work on state projects without pay. These projects included building roads, palaces, and other infrastructure meant to strengthen the kingdom. While such systems were not uncommon in monarchies of the time, the scale and intensity under Ranavalona were extreme. People were often taken from their homes for long periods, leaving families without support and farms unattended. This led to widespread famine and suffering. The harsh conditions, combined with lack of food and medical care, resulted in countless deaths. Some historians estimate that Madagascar's population significantly declined during her reign due to these policies. Yet, from Ranavalonar's perspective, these sacrifices were necessary for the survival and independence of her kingdom. She believed that a strong infrastructure and a disciplined population were essential to resist foreign powers. However, the human cost was immense. Villages were emptied, communities were broken, and countless lives were lost. The very people she sought to protect were the ones who suffered the most. Her rule became a paradox: a queen determined to preserve her nation, yet willing to destroy parts of it in the process. Ranavalona I's reign was also marked by a deep sense of isolationism. While other nations were expanding trade and embracing new technologies, Madagascar under her rule turned inward. She restricted foreign trade, expelled Europeans, and limited contact with the outside world. This decision was driven by her fear of colonization, which was a very real threat during the 19th century. European powers were rapidly expanding their empires, and many African and Asian nations fell under their control. Ranavalona was determined that Madagascar would not share the same fate. However, this isolation came at a cost. Without access to new technologies and trade opportunities, the kingdom struggled economically. Resources became scarce, and innovation slowed. While her intentions may have been to protect her sovereignty, the long-term effects weakened the nation's ability to compete with foreign powers. Her isolationist policies created a kingdom that was both fiercely independent and dangerously vulnerable. It was a bold strategy, but one that required immense sacrifice from her people. In many ways, Ranavalonar's rule can be seen as a battle against an inevitable tide, a desperate attempt to hold onto tradition in a world that was rapidly changing. Whether she was a protector or a destroyer remains a subject of debate among historians. Despite her reputation for cruelty, Ranavalona I was not without intelligence or strategic thinking. She understood the complexities of power and used them to her advantage. Her alliances with military leaders ensured her position remained secure, and her strict policies kept potential rebellions in check. She was a master of psychological control, using fear as a tool to maintain order. Public displays of punishment were not just acts of cruelty, they were calculated messages to her. Every execution, every trial, every decree was designed to reinforce her authority. Yet, this reliance on fear also created an environment of suspicion. Trust became rare, even among her closest advisors. This atmosphere made governance increasingly difficult, as decisions were often driven by paranoia rather than reason. Over time, the very system that kept her in power began to erode the stability of her rule. People obeyed her, but not out of loyalty, out of fear. And fear, while powerful, is not a sustainable foundation for a kingdom. Still, Ranavalona managed to maintain her grip on power for over 3 decades, a testament to her resilience and determination. Her reign was not just long, it was relentless, leaving a lasting impact on Madagascar's history. The human cost of Ranavalona I's rule is perhaps the most haunting aspect of her legacy. Historians estimate that the population of Madagascar may have declined by as much as half during her reign. While exact numbers are difficult to confirm, there is no doubt that her policies led to widespread and suffering. The tangena ordeal, forced labor, executions, and famine all contributed to this devastating loss. Entire generations were affected, and the fabric of the kingdom was deeply damaged. Families were torn apart, communities were destroyed, and fear became a constant companion. Yet, despite this, there were those who remained loyal to her. Some believed in her mission to protect Madagascar from foreign. Others simply had no choice but to accept her rule. Her reign created a complex legacy, one that cannot be easily defined as purely evil or purely protective. It was a time of extremes, where survival often meant submission. The stories passed down through generations speak of both terror and resilience, of a people who endured unimaginable hardships under a queen who refused to bend. This duality is what makes Ranavalona's story so compelling, and so unsettling. As Ranavalona I grew older, her grip on power remained firm, but the cracks in her became more visible. The prolonged isolation, economic strain, and population decline began to take their toll on Madagascar. While she had succeeded in keeping foreign powers at bay during her lifetime, the cost of that independence was immense. By the time of her death in 1861, the kingdom she left behind was weakened and vulnerable. Her successor, Ranavalona II, quickly reversed many of her policies, reopening Madagascar to foreign influence and trade. This dramatic shift highlighted just how extreme Ranavalona's rule had been. It also marked the beginning of a new era, one that would eventually lead to colonization by European powers. In a way, the very outcome Ranavalona feared became inevitable after her death. Her efforts had delayed it, but not prevented it. This raises an important question: was her rule justified? Did she buy her kingdom time, or did she weaken it beyond recovery? The answer depends on perspective. What is certain, however, is that her reign left a lasting imprint on Madagascar's history, one that continues to be studied and debated to this day. Today, Ranavalona I remains one of the most controversial figures in African history. To some, she is a symbol of a ruler who stood against colonial powers and fought to preserve her culture. To others, she is remembered as a tyrant whose rule brought unimaginable suffering to her people. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Her story is a reminder of the complexities of leadership, especially in times of uncertainty and external threat. It challenges us to consider the balance between and compassion, between and oppression. Ranavalona's legacy is not just about what she did, but why she did it. She ruled in a time when the world was changing rapidly, and she chose a path of, no matter the cost. Her name may not be as widely known as other historical rulers, but her impact is undeniable. She was a queen who refused to bow, who ruled with iron and blood, and who left behind a story that continues to captivate and disturb. And perhaps that is why she remains unforgettable, not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of the dark side of absolute power.